The Rolling Stones have a #1 album for the last time, with the release comprised of outtakes and old material, reworked, polished up, and ready to hit the charts. Stay tuned for Tattoo You.
Get ready for the 3324 podcast, where lifelong friends Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber share their love of all things music and movies. Dean has directed short films and is a music trivia buff. And Eric, trained in audio engineering, brings his extensive knowledge of music and film to the conversation as they discuss, debate, and celebrate their favorite albums, films, and much more.
Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast. We're back to the music.
Morning edition.
Morning edition, yeah. And you can tell it's a morning edition because
got our coffee. That's right.
Hot coffee, iced coffee. I'll leave it to you to determine if there's any additional enhancements, but there's not.
No,
not in the morning.
Not this hour of the morning.
Yeah,
we're not. No.
Yeah, I'm never maybe at a bar. Maybe if I was at a barbecue at 11 o'clock. Oh, you want a beer? I would consider it, but generally not a morning drinker.
No.
Not even generally.
No, I don't think I've ever had. Maybe Bloody Mary once at a brunch or something
mimosa
like that.
If you're at a brunch, but not like, it's 11 o'clock. I want a beer.
Hair of the dog. Hair of the dog.
Yeah. It's like, no. So
but
these are just regular coffees.
It's been a while since we did a music episode, hasn't it? Wow.
Yeah. Although this one might not be the one following all of our Oscar ones, so this might sound a little disjointed, but that's okay.
Yeah.
We're bringing you what we feel is the best in music and movie podcasting on a regular basis, week in and week out. Even more consistent than the post office. We are here through snow, sleet, and dead of night. We will bring you everything, and you can also follow us and continue the conversation, continue the experience on social media at 3324 Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. A vibrant community there. Of people that just really love posting. Like I said, I love seeing the posts because they're getting really interesting. We're getting some fun stuff that people are scouring the internet for and then bringing it to our group. So it's really it's like having a really nice feed of stuff that comes in.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah, I dig it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And it's just, people who are, into this stuff as much as we are, but perhaps they're just not.
Sometimes even more so.
Yeah, perhaps they're just not, introvert. Maybe they're slightly introverted. They don't know how to get their opinions and stuff. This is the perfect opportunity to do so.
Post away.
So, yeah, post it.
Post away.
The
Keep
more,
it
the
clean.
better.
Post away.
Keep it clean.
Yeah. Okay, we're in season 3, and we've finally gotten to the Rolling Stones.
Right. Right.
I'm you know what? I'm guessing people could probably infer a little bit in that fact, right? I think there's a little inference in there.
Okay.
What do you that we certainly weren't rushing to do the Rolling Stones. I don't hate the Rolling Stones.
I wouldn't say that I'm their biggest fan, but I think it speaks to the time that this particular album came out. I think that was a great year. 81 was a fantastic year for music, at least for me.
81 and 82 were gold, I would say the golden age, the bronze age, perhaps. For
I was always more, speaking of like how long they've been around, and I was always more of a Who fan, obviously, than the Stones because they came up pretty much at the same time. But that's not to say that they've had some great, fantastic stuff. I mean, especially in the early days.
They're known as, I don't know if they're self-described or this title was given to them, but the world's greatest rock and roll band. And that was given to them pretty early on. I think later on, we'll talk about whether that title is worth it. I think there's a case to be made. But for now, let's get into the stats of their album, Tattoo You. This was released in August of 1981, produced by the Glimmer Twins. And the Glimmer Twins, if you don't know who that is the pairing of Keith Richards and Mick Jagger. And they were the producers starting in the early to mid 70s. They took on the producing duties throughout. And then in the late 80s, they would start to bring on guest producers like Don Was and a couple other ones. But the Glimmer Twins is their working partnership name. All songs are written by Jagger and Richards, with the exception of 2 helped out by Ronnie Wood. There were 3 singles released from this album. Start Me Up hit number 2, Waiting on a Friend hit number 13, and Hang Fire hit number 20. So they started out strong and kind of tailed off. Like I said in the open, this hit number 1 on the Billboard charts, and this would be their last number 1 album, breaking a streak of 8. So they had 8 consecutive number 1 albums.
Yeah.
And this would be the final one, kind of signaling a change in the Rolling Stones a little bit, and then obviously the change in music. And this went 4 times platinum, so in excess of 4 million copies sold.
Not bad for an album of outtakes. It's not even considered a real, technically a real album per se. It's not, you know, they didn't build this thing from the ground up. This is just probably, I would say, one of the most successful leftover albums ever.
It's an interesting story. Yeah. Before we get there, let's do a little. We haven't done any history, but for those that don't know the Rolling Stones, like Eric alluded to, formed in 1962. So they're 61 years young as a group. Originally consisting of Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Brian Jones, not Ronnie Wood, Bill Wyman, and Charlie Watts. Brian Jones would have the part of the 27 curse. He would pass away when he was 27, within the time range of Joplin, Hendrix, and Jim Morrison. In 1968, they get a guitarist named Mick Taylor. He stays around only for a few years. He leaves in 1974, and then Ronnie Wood comes in from the Small Faces, and then that was it. Like from 74 on, you had the Rolling Stones.
That was the lineup right there.
And that was the lineup. And that's pretty much known as now the classic lineup.
Yeah.
Usually when you talk about music, people are you a Beatles fan or an Elvis fan? Right? There's usually that camp. Are you Beatles or Elvis? Right? And then once you choose that, or if you choose the Beatles, then the next question is always Beatles or Stones.
Yeah.
Right. It's like you're one of the, like you either went with the Beatles in the 60s, or you kind of went a little dirtier and greasier with the Stones.
To me, that was always the more accurate comparison, or few, whatever you want, rivalry you want to call it. Elvis, to me, I the Beatles adored Elvis Presley. They admired him. So to me, it never felt like
I think the comparison was more not rivalry, but in musical preference. Is like
musical preference, popularity.
Are you an Elvis guy, or are you a Beatles guy? And then are you a Beatles fan or are you a Stones fan? Like those were always the two comparisons that you would run into.
Yeah,
we probably are undeniably Beatles.
Yeah,
over the Stones.
I agree.
And the Stones were very much in the Beatles' shadow back in the day. The Beatles were even writing songs for them early on. The Stones would copy album art. Beatles would come out with an album. The Stones' next album would be very similar in album art, in style. So through the 60s, they were very much kind of, they started carving out their own sound, undeniably, but it wasn't until the 70s, probably when the Beatles broke up, that the Stones were probably like finally released.
Yeah, I agree. I would agree with that. Yep.
Not that they were copying the Beatles. They weren't but there was that influence, and they always seemed to be kind of right behind the Beatles in things like, Sgt. Pepper would come out, and then Her Satanic Majesty's Request would come out, shot by the guy who shot the Sgt. Pepper cover would shoot that, and it's psychedelic and similar. There's all these kind of parallels between the two.
Yeah, and most certainly, I mean, the same was true of the members themselves. I mean, they were. You come to find out, you thought, you think back in the day, everybody was like getting along. They were all like kind of coming up together. They all respected one another, but those rivalries were there. There was, I don't like this. I don't like John Lennon. I don't like, they're like, and every now and again they would do like these little weird projects. I remember the Rock and Roll Circus thing that they did. The Who were involved with that.
Yeah, that was John Lennon, Clapton, right? They had that
Clapton. It was a whole big weird kind of like, and it aired, I think maybe once, and of course it's been released.
It's finally released, yeah,
officially. But just an odd thing, and it's just people sitting around and costumes and performing their thing. But I don't think that they actually. I mean, if you listen to Keith Richards today, he would say, not some kind things about the Beatles at the time, and
Yeah,
and
he's
it's
becoming
just,
crotchety. That's why.
yeah, I think they all have, but I mean, it's just,
and you,
but it's
and you,
surprising. It's still surprising to me
yeah,
that,
and,
it's a
and
shame, but
and
but
you know what they say is they say if there's ever a nuclear war, the only thing left will be cockroaches, Cher, and Keith Richards are the only things that are going to survive. Only three things that are eternal. You
you know
know,
what? It's
Keith
probably
Richards
true.
is a meme that is going to go on forever. In the 70s, the Stones really kind of came into their own, but also heavy drug use. I mean,
Mhm.
it is surprising to me that there were no, and I'm happy that there were no drug fueled casualties because these guys were just doing everything and
Mhm.
anything and being quite prolific. They're putting out like almost an album a year in the 70s. I mean, they're really just they're working, they're partying as hard as they're working.
Yeah.
They really were known for in the 70s, they were known, they were always there was always a drug bust, someone getting arrested, someone getting caught with something on them. That was as much as their music in hand in the 70s was the Rolling Stones really, really epitomized the excess of the 70s.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. And they were very prolific. I mean, you talk about, I mean, they're best. I would argue that not even argue, but most people would agree that their best work was probably like the up to 74, 75. You had Exile on Main Street. You had, Sticky Fingers. You had, those are classic. I mean, Let It Bleed at like 69, I believe. And that's probably my favorite album besides Tattoo You. But then again, then they started like, of course, they had to, keep up with the times, and disco started coming in, so they started doing that, started experimenting with emotional rescue and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, which I wasn't a
Well,
big fan of.
yeah, they weren't.
You know,
I don't think they were overly influenced by it, though. I think they still retained
their own
their
thing,
Stones
their own
edge.
interpretation, yeah,
Yeah,
of it.
because
But
you had punk that was there as well. You had the disco revolution going on at the same time,
Mhm.
and the Stones kind of emerged from that. 1980 was their album Emotional Rescue.
Yeah.
And that kind of started them off in the 80s. Um, and it's funny that the reason why this album came to be is because they wanted to go out on tour. And
Mhm.
back then, there was still that notion of we need an album to tour behind, which is
Yeah.
ridiculous now
Right. Yeah.
because
Nobody's
nobody
thinking that
tours
way.
behind an album. People just tour,
No.
their jukebox. Like the Stones are still touring, God bless them,
Mhm.
and they're touring on their jukebox material. But
Mhm.
back then it was like, well, we need something. Um, the famous rift between Mick Jagger and Keith Richards was really starting to really ferment at this time. But because they were preparing for a tour, they didn't have time to make an album proper. So it wasn't the feuding hadn't hit the boiling point.
Mhm.
It wouldn't until the mid 80s. But at this point, they're like, yeah, we want to go out on tour. We need something to get behind it. So the assistant producer, Chris Kinsey, went into the vault and he was just trolling through stuff. And he goes, we've got enough stuff here
Mhm.
dating back to as far back as 1972.
Yeah.
We've
Yeah.
got tracks, either complete backing tracks or germs of stuff that we can grow, and
Yeah.
notions of stuff that we can grow into an album. So a lot of the backing stuff was done. They needed lyrics, they needed kind of, melodies and that kind of stuff. So they, yeah, like you said, usually like it's a compilation album, kind of, and it's kind of everything old is new again.
Absolutely. I had no idea at the time that it was
Yeah,
that because you would never know the way they put that stuff together. And I know Jagger was probably the main component there. I think a lot of the stuff was already laid down. Guitar tracks were laid down already, and so I don't know if the rest of the band had that much of an input. But I know Jagger was the one who came in and wrote lyrics and melodies over that, and when the recording of that was actually happening, he was the only one to show up
yeah,
to
because a
do
lot of the
that.
stuff
So
was
it's
done
very
or
much
had
like
been finished off. Yeah,
right. So he was just sort of just putting the final exclamation point on, if you will, on that stuff. And bringing in other guest, musicians like Sonny Rollins on sax, on Waiting on a Friend, and things like that. But yeah, I had no idea until much later that it was that kind of an album, and I had already been into albums like that.
Yeah.
The odds and sods, as I like to call, like, and it's, Pisces Iscariot by the Pumpkins and things like that. Like, they're just great stuff that you don't want to throw away. You just put it out just for the sake of putting it out. But in this case, in this case, they actually did have to do some work on it. So,
Yeah,
I mean, it
that's the
wasn't like,
difference.
right,
Yeah,
exactly.
this
So,
wasn't, stuff we finished but never released. So
yeah.
it sounds, I don't think you could have gotten away with something recorded completely in 1972, putting it on an album from 81.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of this album is some of the songs have shades of the different eras that they're from.
Mm-hmm.
But it all kind of blends together, and that's because the Stones were so consistent throughout the 70s in their sound. They never went into like a prog thing, and they never went into these different for these different fads and genres. That all this material that they retained was easily adapted. It wasn't like they had some weird thing, then they had to like reconfigure it. It's like they had all the skeletons of the songs and were able just to bring them forward, and put some lyrics on it, put some little guitar licks or whatever it needed to be polished up, and you've got new material.
Yeah, and you could almost, if you really listen and you really dig into it, and you could probably pick apart, if you're a diehard Stones fan and every lick, everything that they've done, and you're so immersed in the music, you could argue that this album could be almost like a best of, only in the sound, like you pointed out, like
a retrospective
of each of them, like making those subtle changes, and each song brings something to that, and it's like almost like not a greatest hits, but like a best of kind of thing, a best of feel, and that's unique. That would be
it is.
You've
got the song like Slave.
Yeah,
which is kind of like it's like their it feels like their mid-70s output. It has like that groove, that funk that they were kind of doing.
The misogynist lyrics.
And
by today's standards are not.
And it certainly had that feel. So there is some throwbackiness to it. But again, since the Stones were so consistent, it doesn't sound dated. It just sounds like more Rolling Stone stuff that they do,
Right.
Start Me Up was a reggae influenced song. And then, you know what? You put that iconic opening riff from Keith Richards on it, and you've got something that kind of lit the place up. And this album came out in August of 1981. MTV launched in August of 1981.
Yeah.
And that fucking video was everywhere. You remember Start Me Up with,
of course,
Mick Jagger with the sweatpants, like he looks like a beanpole. He still does. The guy never gained an ounce.
I remember,
was just like a really thrown together video.
It was just a black background with them lit, but it was and
but then after that, subsequent videos like Waiting on a Friend, because they were aware, they were kind of on the cusp of understanding what MTV was going to be. Is that they then started to tailor music video content for viewing, Start Me Up, I think Jump from Van Halen is like the spiritual cousin of it, right? It was the same type of, like, they're just like, let's get a camera, let's get a couple of 6-packs and film what happens. But Start Me Up was content, when MTV was looking for content, you've got something new from a classic band that they can just play the crap out of, and they did it.
Yeah. I mean, that video, a lot of bands just they didn't have that mindset of we have to create a story around our, they left that to the directors, to the, whatever the concept was. And most of the time, those stories never really made any sense to what
it was more like art school for the directors.
It was exactly, it was to launch their careers as filmmakers, right? But I always enjoyed those very minimal videos of just them performing the song. right? So you get to see the band, you get to see what they
Yeah,
do.
that was always my preference, but rather than them
Exactly.
having an adventure and
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
chase like Don't Cry, like from Asia, they're all like Indiana Jones. One's in Egypt and they're getting zapped, and
Oh my goodness.
it's
Yeah.
fun,
Yeah.
but it was
Yeah.
I would have rather seen Asia performing because that
That's
was a
right.
band you didn't really see, but it was got
That's
larger.
right.
But the
Yeah.
Stones, yeah, they kept it pretty much. They kept it simple. They played to their strengths,
Hmm.
which is their iconic image of Mick Jagger. You want to see him strutting around
Yeah.
and getting out there, and you want to see Keith Richards just kind of really lazily like hitting that Telecaster. They have such great looks and iconic looks that you could just put the camera in front of them and let them. And Charlie Watts look like he doesn't give a shit in that
Yeah.
video. He's like,
He never smiles.
with
He's just,
cigarette
that's
hanging out of his
Charlie.
mouth or whatever. He's like,
And Bill Wyman, same
Bill
thing. He's
Wyman,
just like,
yeah,
he's like real serious on the bass.
yeah.
But I have to say though, I always loved the Neighbors video because
Yeah.
even my mother loved that video. Like she would laugh because
Uh-huh.
it's just so funny. Like Jagger hanging off the window like neighbor with the big
Yeah.
mouth, and it's just hilarious. It's like in the song. When you listen to the song, I just immediately go there, and it just makes me smile. And it has that effect now, And of course,
Yeah.
"Waiting on a Friend" is probably my all-time favorite Stones song, and that's saying a lot because they've got a lot of great
There's a
songs.
lot in their
But
canon
I
of
just
hits.
love that
It's
track
got the
and
groove. It's got a nice groove to it.
and the sax, and they're hanging out on the building. And by the way, that building that they filmed. That was the building they took the famous Physical Graffiti cover was the same building in New York City.
From Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, from Led
Yeah.
Zeppelin. So that's where they're
Iconic
sitting on the
location.
stoop. That's that same building. So
Yeah, it's got
anybody
that like
doesn't know.
cool, like Waiting on a Friend has like that cool
Mhm.
jazzy sound to it. It's hip. The Stones could go there.
Soulful.
That was
Yeah.
one of the things is the Stones are known for that really, that Keith Richards dirty. He's like the original dirty guitarist. From the beginning, the Stones were riff based.
Oh yeah.
And that was like their thing. But they were able to kind of adapt that too, and would get blue. They would really get bluesy, and they would really get funky with it too. And they weren't afraid to go there
Mhm.
and mine some of those genres
Well,
and incorporate it into the Stones sound.
Yeah, that was the big difference between them and the Beatles at first was they really approached, they came from the blues. Like they was like that was it. This is what we want to do. And everything kind of just grew from there. But I love that sort of soulful type of stuff. And it's a return to form dating back to those early days of that kind of stuff. That's why this album I think kind of stands out. Because they weren't doing "Miss You," there's no real songs like that on here. It's more of that R&B-ish, just great sound that you like you pointed out. It's just very smooth and it just
Yeah,
but also rock and roll too. You got "Start Me Up," you got "Hang Fire," you got
Little T&A
"Little T and A"
with Keith Richards.
Yeah,
and that was the point of the album is the album is actually split. Side one is a rock side,
Mhm.
and side two is a ballad side. So they really were going. We used to talk a lot about sequencing, and that was their approach here. Is we wanted side one to be like the rockers, and if you
Mhm.
and once you get past what the heck is Neighbors, right? And that's like the last rave up song that you get.
Yeah.
That ends side one, and then side two is Worried About You, Tops, Heaven, No Use in Crying. It's a lot mellower, and
Mhm.
the pace kind of and the tempo kind of drops down, and it kind of the album kind of mellows out a little bit, So it's kind of an interesting that they
Yeah.
were able to do that with their choice of material allowed them to say, well, we've got a group that we want to keep this group of songs together because they're really up tempo, they're rockers.
Mhm.
And then we've got this other section of stuff on the second side that's going to kind of mellow out.
I think
And
I think there's probably a good sense of knowing what the audience what their fans want as well, because they've already with albums like Exile and things like that, you really want to go deep, and that's an album that there's really no major hits off that record. There's a lot of stuff, and it's a double album. There's a lot to chew on, and if people love that stuff, then they pretty much know the sequencing, I think, speaks to like the people are going to like this. They're going to know, this, that they're not going to have a problem with one side being, one more mellow song after another and that
Yeah.
kind of, but,
And I think
so
it works. I think
it
in this
does
case,
work.
it
It
works
absolutely
because,
does. Yeah.
yeah, you can kind of get into, especially on that second side, you kind of get into that flow. And two of the songs on that side, Waiting on a Friend and Tops,
Mm-hmm.
they date back to 1972. Those are two of the oldest songs.
Yeah.
And it turns out that they were so old that Mick Taylor, who we talked about as the replacement guitarist for Brian Jones, he actually, his guitar playing is on those songs.
Yeah.
And
That's
he
how
said,
old. Yeah.
you know what? You guys got to pay me. Like, if you're going to use it, like he realized, or however it came to be, he's like, that's my guitar work and you're releasing it. So
I know, let's go,
you got
yeah,
to pay me.
well,
And then, just a side note is after Mick Taylor left, right, and before Ronnie Wood joined, they're auditioning guitar. Well, they knew they needed another guitarist.
yeah.
So they brought in people to play with them, quote unquote, Jeff Beck, a couple of big guitarists at the time, Peter Frampton, but they didn't tell them. And Jeff Beck was like, I didn't know at the time that I was auditioning for the Rolling Stones. I thought they just asked me to come in and play. When meanwhile, the Stones were actually auditioning these people in their mind of, we need another guitarist. But these guys were just coming in, not knowing this was an audition. It was just like, yeah, let's play, let's do this, come play on the record or whatever. So they had people playing on records that were actually covertly being auditioned until Ronnie Wood.
I think
was hired.
It wouldn't have, I don't think it would have worked with somebody like Jeff Beck, who is more of a lead. He's an experimentalist. He's like, there's no, that the Stones music doesn't require that,
it doesn't require technical solos.
It's not like you pointed out. There's not a whole hell of a lot of lead guitar soloing and like long extent. It's like more rhythm. It's all rhythm.
Yeah, it's more that blues-based kind of soloing.
That's
and
right.
Ronnie Wood would kind of handle that when they brought him in. And oddly enough, Ronnie Wood was hired as an employee of the Stones. He was not made a member until like the 90s, I think maybe 1990 or something. So he was like,
that's interesting.
Kind of an employee of the Rolling Stones. And then finally, I think in 90 or somewhere in the 90s, he was made a member of the Rolling Stones International or whatever the company was. So he became, so it took what 74 took 16 years to prove that you're going to be a long-term.
That's interesting.
A long-term employee that,
wow. Well, it's like the bass when Bill Wyman left, so they replaced him with Daryl Jones from he was
but not as an official member. But
exactly,
after that, it was just kind of like, we'll get people.
Yeah,
but there are no more There are no more members. Just like the Who, there's no more members of the Who. It's whoever whatever's left. But then they've got the backing musicians.
I never knew that about Ronnie Wood. That kind of sucks when you think about it.
Like, sure he was getting paid good, right?
Yeah, I'm sure, but still,
but he was an employee of the Stones. And then finally made a member, which he deserves. I mean, he's been the longest,
of course,
guitarist right after Keith Richards. I mean, that kind of, Ronnie Wood really kind of stabilized the band. At that point, it was like, okay, here's, when you see the Rolling Stones, people don't know about Brian Jones, and Mick Taylor was barely in long enough and really didn't contribute much to even be a part of the legend. Although when they got inducted, I think he was inducted, Mick Taylor. So really interesting. And Ronnie Wood is a really great artist. He did the work for Eric Clapton's Crossroads box set. So he's an artist in his own right.
Mm-hmm.
But he's kind of probably the third most unknown, visually everybody knows Ronnie Wood, but he's not flashy. He's kind of, and again, Keith Richards is kind of like, with the scarves and just the way he plays his guitar, he kind of is the showcase for the Stones as far as musicians, and Charlie Watts and Bill Wyman are there to support, kind of like to a lesser degree, like a Mick Fleetwood and John McVie. Yeah. Although Mick Fleetwood can be very flashy, Charlie Watts is a great pocket drummer, and the Stones don't require that kind of drumming. The Stones never required big kit drumming like the Who.
He was,
or like Zeppelin, like any of their other counterparts. The interesting part about the Stones is the setup was very basic.
Yeah, and
You know?
it worked. It most
Yeah,
definitely a lot of drummers admire the hell out of Charlie Watts for doing that for so long. The steadfast beat, the
yeah.
whole it's just so understated but effective at the same time. That was his thing. That
Not a
was,
he's not a distracting drummer. He's
right.
there to kind of provide, almost probably closer to a Ringo.
Yeah.
Probably closer to Ringo Starr in meaning in what his role is. Is that
I would
instead of,
argue that he was tighter than Ringo in his playing.
but meaning he wasn't
you
like
know.
the like the Flash and the
Oh, no,
John
no, 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 no,
Bonham,
not at
like that.
all. Not at all. He didn't
The
have that.
fills, he was there to cement what everything else that was going to be laid
And
on top of it.
that's how he liked it. He just in the background, just, don't pay
Yeah,
attention to me. I'm keeping the beat and
wearing a suit. Everybody
but
else is,
that
all,
became but that did become the thing. Like people were noticing that. So so sometimes it doesn't, if you're trying to be quiet and
he
out of the
stood out by
way,
not standing out.
exactly.
He
So
absolutely did.
and a lot of drummers just loved him for that, So yeah,
Yeah, on this album, like I said, it's just it's so very consistent, which is what which blew me away too. Once I found out the pedigree, because when this came out, I remember when it came out and Tattoo You was big. Everybody was
yeah,
listening to this. And I was still relatively early on. I was aware of the Stones, obviously, but um, in researching this and then giving this a bunch of listens, um, it's one you can kind of like. It's kind of you can kind of relax to this album a little bit, even
you.
with the up tempo stuff. I'm kind of like I'm putting it on. I'm kind of like, oh yeah, it's like it takes you through and you kind of get into a groove with it,
I was gonna.
which I wasn't prepared for.
No, I was gonna say that it's my go-to Stones album.
Yeah,
When I just want to listen to just an album all the way through and not have to really dig deep. And like again, I mentioned Exile because that's a very deep album to kind of get into. When you don't want to go there, you don't have the time, or you just don't want to do that. The Tattoo You is the perfect choice because it's just so good, and just every song is precise. It's exactly what you need at that moment, and it works on that level. So yeah, it's like happy comfort food for me
yeah.
in terms of the Stones. If I want to go deeper, yeah, I'll listen to the more the heavier stuff, as it were. But this, no, I just put this on, and it's just
So that being said, the fact that they mined all this old material, um, is that a good thing? I said earlier, it's like, well, this was very easy for them to make this album because a lot of their material was so consistent.
Mhm.
Is that a good thing that the Stones have essentially? I'm going to use that in a broad term. That the Stones have essentially never changed. I mean, if you look at Zeppelin, they had a much shorter span,
Yeah.
or the Beatles, or any other band. If you look at let's look at Zeppelin. By the time they got to their last album, they were sounding vastly different, and you saw there was a
Mhm.
direction that they were heading into.
Mhm.
But it was still firmly Led Zeppelin. You can't really like the Stones. Like, yeah, you could almost pick outside of the 60s stuff sounds decidedly like the 60s, but once you get to the 70s, you can almost pick songs from every other album, and you might not be able to place the date as easily. Now, is that a good thing?
Well, I guess it all depends. And do you like music that much to notice these kinds of things? I think that's the Stones really. I think that's the reason why they identify with so many people who are just maybe just casual listeners of
You think so?
rock music. I think so. I think if somebody like you and I are obviously going to point this kind of stuff out, not
No,
that
I'm
we're
just wondering. Like, I never thought about it, until this. And
no,
I'm like,
I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily.
there was never like a rock opera,
it's
or
just
there was
what
never like this big
no
concept album. It was
no.
kind of year after year, like album after album after album after
I think
album.
if anything, in their later work, they would get even more bluesy.
Yeah.
So that might be a thing. I remember that last
Well, are you
album.
talking post? Yeah, you're talking post
Or
this.
post Tattoo You. We're talking like much later. There was that one album that they put. I forget the name of
Bridges
it.
to Babylon, or
No, even later than that. It was a blues album that they came out with, and it was so good. It was like it shouldn't be this good. At this stage of their career,
Blue and Lonesome.
they put an album out
It was
that is
2016.
Yeah,
Was Blue and Lonesome.
I think so. I think that's the one, and there was just some really really good stuff in it. And that's when I actually
Yeah, that
saw
was
them,
only covers.
and I actually saw the Stones.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, in Tampa. That was like it was really it was well within the 2000. I think it was like the
Uh-huh.
2010s. Might have been a bit earlier than that.
Wow.
But
You're
yeah, they
talking, I
did.
mean, they're well into their 60s and already like well into their late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah, and it was an amazing show, and of
Yeah.
course, you know, I'm glad to have seen the Stones. It's like you know, but I'm
I think
sure.
that's one, yeah, it's got to be something. And like I
I
said,
don't
they
know
seem
if that
ageless
was.
because they're touring forever.
I don't think that was the one. I'm
It
looking it
wasn't,
up right
wasn't it?
now.
Before that was a Bigger Bang.
Bigger Bang. That was it.
Okay.
A Bigger Bang was. I thought it was an amazing record. It's like it just, but again, it's like this album shouldn't be this good. You know, it was solid. It was them
Yeah.
really, you know, really approaching the blues. And not every song is a blues song, but it was like. But then they did, yeah. Then the album after that, where they did the covers, that's when they kind of hit upon that. You know, maybe somebody they were liking, you know, doing that stuff so much that they tend to, you know, whatever. But so the fact that it wasn't a hit, though, I mean, it was just a solid record. And the fact that
Yeah.
they could still make a record like that, I just, you know, people are saying, "Oh, they need to hang it up," but well, the proof is there. You know, it's like they still know how to do
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah. I
they're,
mean,
you know,
Tattoo You would be the end of
yeah,
that run.
hmm
Um, I don't think it has to do with the animosity, because after this, I think they switched to CBS Records.
hmm
Um, that Mick Jagger started putting out solo records.
yeah,
Um, Keith Richards wasn't too happy about it. That's when when the backbiting and the fighting started in the mid '80s,
hmm
and that's when the Stones were probably closest to calling it quits. And then in '88, Keith Richards puts out "Talk Is Cheap," which was a great album.
yeah,
Like he kind of all of a sudden, like, he puts out an album and it's pretty popular, kind of steal. And it was almost like a slap in the face to Mick Jagger of, you know what, I can do this too,
hmm
you know, but maybe we're better off, because Mick Jagger's solo career, for a guy that fronts one of the greatest rock and roll bands in the world,
hmm
his solo career is seriously lacking. I mean, he's not almost like, what I think about Roger Daltrey.
yeah.
Same,
You're
like a
right.
guy that fronted one of the world's greatest bands and some of the most iconic songs, but their solo stuff, you don't know anything
Well, the
of it.
difference there is, and it's surprising, even more surprised that Mick Jagger's a songwriter. Roger Daltrey is not. He hasn't really written all that much. So a
Mhm.
lot of people wrote songs for him in his solo career. But yeah, it is surprising that Jagger didn't really embrace
He just
more.
didn't have hit. Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
like that. Like his stuff just didn't do anything. So I think that
he
also
ends
kind
up
of,
doing the duet with David Bowie and
yeah,
dancing in the
dancing in the
street and
streets.
stuff
But
like that.
beyond that,
Yeah,
it's kind of like, okay, maybe we are better together, right? And
yeah.
and Steel Wheels would come
Steel
out,
Wheels, and that was a
which would
that
be Mixed Emotions, which was like that. That was like
that was a
it.
formidable
It didn't
album.
hit number. Yeah, it didn't
Not
hit
bad.
number one, but it was a
Yeah,
comeback. It was like, wow, the Stones are kind of showing that they still have it,
that's right.
with a
And
couple of, in between, it was like two or three middling releases. Harlem Shuffle was in there, Undercover,
I
you know,
remember
but
being
Steel
really
Wheels comes out and it's like, yeah,
I remember being really impressed with Bill Wyman on that record. I just the bass lines on that record are solid. Has a lot of great sounding tracks, and that was strong, very strong comeback. Um, Again, maybe not their best, but it was, considering everything you just mentioned about the animosity and everything, they would just get their shit together and
yeah.
put something decent out like that. And that's the Stones. They just keep doing that. They just have that knack of it, and that's what people, I guess, come to expect from them. If you're a real Stones fan, if you're a real, diehard fan, most people are like, "Oh, why don't they just freaking retire already?" Why are they still doing this? Like, but hey, if it works, it works. Keep, keep
Well,
going.
and that's the question, right? Because it's somewhere in the '70s, early '70s, they had gotten the name,
Yeah.
the world's greatest rock and roll band, and that was like '72, maybe somewhere around
Mhm.
there. Now in 2023, I'm asking you, are they the world's greatest rock and roll band? just because of the longevity, because of the fact that they're still playing to massive stadiums, everything that they've been through personally and professionally with the drugs and all that and the fighting, and the fact that they're still out there,
mm-hmm.
and they've outlasted everybody but the Who. Like the Who is kind of like they're not kind of right behind them,
Yeah, but they're not the Who.
They're not the Who, but the Stones aren't. You can say the Stones aren't the Stones, but as in form and function, it's the Who. You're going out to see the Who. You're going out to see the main.
Well, for the most part,
the two main members performing.
Yeah, well, we lost Charlie. We lost, so we,
and Bill Wyman. Yeah, but are they? Have they now earned it? They may have been crowned as such in 1972, but in 2023, have they done it by just outlasting, right, and just having that?
Well, I mean, power. And that's the default factor, I guess, that would come into that. I mean, it would have to be, right. I mean, it's just, there's no other band quite like them doing it as much. Like I said, I mean, you got all these acts out there that are just playing the greatest hits. They're still picking songs and writing new material. I don't know if they've done anything lately, but I think
2016 was the last studio album. Was the that covers album.
But I heard that they were working on something. I think I heard rumblings of that, and I know they're going back out on tour. And I would say so. Yeah. I think I would probably have to make.
I think so too. I think you'd have to concede that. If Elton John was in a band, maybe he would lay claim to for that long. Like honestly, for the longevity, it's the staying power of the Stones.
But that's my point. But you need to we're always saying we're big advocates for artists who just because you're getting older doesn't mean you stop writing, you stop making new music. You and I are both big advocates for that. Yep. We love that. But people like Billy Joel just hung it up. Yeah. They're like, there's nothing more to say. And yet he's doing residencies at Madison Square Garden. He's still out there performing. Yep. And he just refuses to get back in there. And just because a lot of the attitude of that is like, it's kind of a shame, really, when you think about it. A lot of artists are like, what's the point of going back in the studio? Nobody's listening to albums anymore. It makes me sad to hear people say that. But it's probably true. The way people are digesting music today is so different.
But at least he's going out there and giving what he's giving and giving it his all, right? So
absolutely, no doubt about that.
Artists that are out there that are going they're going on tours, but they're like lackluster, or and the Stones are. Mick Jagger is still putting it all on the table. He is not just standing behind a microphone because he can't walk, or like. He is right. Not letting anything stop him.
That's right.
And I think based on that, and I think based on the trials and tribulations of the personnel and the fighting, the drug abuse, the massive drug abuse in the 70s of coming through that and still being able to do this and do it to stadiums. It's not like the Stones are on like the small theater tour.
That's right.
They, I think, I think the staying power, I think they have proved that they could be the world's greatest rock and roll band.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think they proved like this is, you can have all these things happen to you and weather them and still come out on the other side. Like that might be the lesson.
Yeah.
In that.
And it's a great one. It is a great lesson.
Keith Richards is probably going to live another 100 years anyway. So it's like,
Well, it's like that. What was it? Almost Famous. There's that line with Jimmy Fallon. He's playing they bring in the producer, and he's like, if you think then and this is supposed to be 1973, right? Yeah. So if you think that Mick Jagger is going to be doing that well into his 70s, you're sadly mistaken. But here we are. It's
that was probably written. Yeah,
it's a running joke, of course, but it's like, but that's
but it's true.
But it's so true. Yeah,
it's
true.
Great. And
why not? I mean, I'll pay to see them again if I had the opportunity, if it was affordable,
and especially for something that at the time in 1962, rock and roll was still a fad. It was still subversive, right? It was still very much like, punks and rebels are listening to this kind of stuff.
Is it going to last? It's not going to last. People are like, already.
I'll do this as a lark.
Right.
And, literally 61 years later, they're still doing it as a career, and they're probably richer than they ever were. So I think that for something that started off as, all these guys seem to be, tell me if I'm wrong, whenever I read biographies of English groups from the 60s, it always seems like they were always in art school.
Yeah,
all
you're
these
right.
people like Peter Gabriel, like all these people were in art school.
They came from,
and they left art school to put a band together. Like I never read anybody that was.
And what
was
is art school?
Like working a job in a grocery store. It was like they were all in art school.
Well, that's my question. What is art school? Like
I don't know.
They went to is it legit like art? Like they were
like design,
like artists, like design.
I mean, architect or
I don't know.
Was, but all these English artists in the 60s were all in art school.
Who,
all
Clapton,
childhood friends from art school, and they got together. I know somebody from art school that can play the drums.
Yeah.
Right. It was all art school.
Either that or some of them maybe did some like hard labor. They're working with their dads or something like that. But then their dads were working their asses off to put them through art school. Yeah. And then some of them would just dumb their nose up at it. Just say, I don't want to do this.
Go to art school, but they still have a band on the side.
Then they found the guitar, and then they found their thing. And
that always seems to be, it's almost like a meme. It's almost like a myth or a meme of like the English, all these English people were in art school. And unless that's what they called school, maybe, I don't know, but
well, yeah, it's, I guess they're radically different over there, but it's just, art school, I guess, graphic design, I think, or
wasn't finger painting.
But who knows?
I
don't know.
Yeah,
I think of like the headmaster, like like Pink Floyd, and like the wall, like
the guys in their shorts with the caps on, and
exactly
all the school guys,
Yeah.
I don't know. It just seemed like a thing. I don't know how it just.
But that's the
thing. I know Jagger. I believe Jagger was in art school,
but I can't picture any one of these guys sitting in a classroom, though. Can you? I mean, like it's just bizarre. It is.
But really they were all clean cut, back then. It was, even for quote unquote long hair Beatles, those hairstyles were certainly not offensive. In 1962, they were swept to the side. Their hair was like swept to the side, and it was just freaking. It was below the neck, but it certainly wasn't. Go to 1969, and John Lennon's got a beard down to his chest, and he's got long, like that was like long hair. Like if you had something to be afraid of. Be afraid of that. It certainly wasn't these guys from England, and they're wearing suits.
Yeah,
all these guys, the Stones, they all wore suits. And everybody was so clutching their pearls over this. Like, oh my God, they're coming, and we're not
just talking about like suits. I mean, they started out with like maybe the thin ties and things like that, but then they started wearing like the Austin Powers type, with the frills and
everything got
the velvet and suede and all that.
Well, that's what psychedelia hit,
right?
And they took those fashions and just like threw a can of paint on it, like splashed rainbow all over everything, and it just kind of changed the whole landscape. But the Stones, they did it. They survived, and they survived being in the shadow of the Beatles, right? So I think there's a lot to. I probably don't give them enough respect because I'm such a Beatles fan, and it's kind of like, the Beatles were doing it. The Beatles were all that stuff, and the Stones weren't known for and maybe that's the thing too, is the Stones weren't known for innovating music, right?
No, they were just known pretty steady.
For steady.
Band that you can count on. A band you can count on for.
You're right.
For that kind of thing, like you want something steady, you want something. Some like we said, like soulful, bluesy. It's it was that very much like with Charlie Watts. Keeping that rhythm all these years, that's the Stones. It's like, we can count on them to do that kind of stuff. And when we don't want to listen to anything too crazy or too heady or too,
fanfare for the common man. when you
part of the sunrise and supper's ready.
ELP and Tarkus and whatever, you can kind of
but
the Stones on it, and maybe that's what it is. Maybe the Stones, are the greatest because they weren't innovating. They weren't trying to change the world. They were just trying to bring really good music, and do it consistently, right? And do it the way they liked. And that's you know what? I think there's something to be said that for that too, because there was no misfires of here's our disco album, and here's like Kiss made their disco album or this thing and the other thing. The Stones just kind of,
It was
you said it, we're just steady as she
they
goes.
They put it out. People loved it at the time.
Yeah, we're going to keep just doing our thing.
Maybe that stuff doesn't hold up as well, but it was, people were.
But they weren't trying to reinvent the wheel. Is my point? Is
Right.
they kind of like, here's what we do. We're just going to keep getting good at it. We're going to keep exploring it.
Mm-hmm.
On the outer fringes of stuff, and not go whole hog into another direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that stability, I think, is what saw them through, actually.
Yeah.
Because there was no misfire album like Kilroy Was Here that would like the bit like that would break the band, like that. No, really, that would like divide the band
right.
or something, right? There was none.
You're right.
None of those things.
There was no radical departure from what they were.
That could put everything in jeopardy as well, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
And you could argue that U2 might have been the maybe the second coming of the Stones in that sense, that when they first started out, they were pretty much doing the same thing again. And then, of course, we talked about
Achtung Baby,
which was that was the change. They embraced a new sound, and ever since
that was necessary. Like that change was necessary. The Stones never had that crisis of conscience, I guess, that they would have. They just probably because they were just too wasted through the 70s and just kind of kept going through, stumbling through album after album, but putting out great stuff. So
but you know what though? I mean, it's I think it's a lot like, if you really dig, a lot of their lyrics. I mean, they've written some pretty deep songs, and I think that's what people really enjoy about the Stones too. Is not just the music; it's lyrically they're they have, I would argue, deeper lyrics than most rock bands out there. That are, I dare I say, intellectual, more intellectual, a lot more thought put into what they're talking about than say,
Get Off My Cloud.
Hey, Jovi or something, a band like that. You know what I'm talking about,
absolutely.
So yeah, they do. They have their moments when they could be as deep as any, band of that era. But on the other hand, maybe not musically, but like I said, lyrically steadfast. But we could do it really simple and put it out there and make it accessible to a lot of people. And I think a lot of people do relate to the Stones in that way. Yeah. Who doesn't like the Stones? I mean, that's. I can't imagine, that's one of those bands, like we talked about Zeppelin in the same fashion. Like they're just a band that you can just count on. You don't have to love them. You don't have to be the biggest fan. You just know that they exist. They're out there, and I could put on a Stones album and say, this is great stuff.
There we go. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a perfect place for us to take the exit ramp off. I think you've made a really, honestly, really great closing statement for that of where the Stones fit in. So by all means, check out Tattoo You. There's it's on Spotify. It's on streaming. There's a deluxe edition with a whole bunch of extra live stuff. Just listen to the album. Just go for the album. 11 songs, 44 minutes and change. You're in, you're out, and you can kind of see where they were as the musical landscape was about to change in a big way, and they still didn't take the bait really. So 81. Music was about to change radically. Second British invasion was on the horizon, but the Stones didn't take the bait and they didn't fall into the trap. They just kind of, again, kept doing what they were doing, and that's part of the allure. So that's going to do it for this episode of the 3324 podcast. Check it out. Tattoo You from the Stones, August of 1981. Start Me Up. It's going to get you going, and let them take you the rest of the way. So for Eric, this has been Dean. We will see you on the flip side.
You've been listening to the 3324 podcast with Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast and on Twitter at 3324p to join the conversation.